Knox County students. I'm Mandy Hipsher, and I teach at Little Springs Middle School. Today's lesson is based on the week 4 assignment for grade 6 ELA. If you don't have this assignment, it can be found by visiting the KCS website at knoxschools.org. Click See All Resources under the KCS Home logo. If you would like to have the lesson printed, the middle school packets are handed out on Mondays and Wednesdays from 10 a.m. to noon at each of our meal distribution sites. A list of those sites can be found under the Meal Distribution tab at the KCS website. Please be sure to complete the entire week's assignment before continuing this video. Like I said, if you haven't completed the week's 4 assignments, stop and return to the video once you've finished your work so we can go over it together. Now, let's get started. Okay, guys, as I go through this video, just a few things to know. If the video for some reason is hard to understand, you can turn on closed captions if available. Sometimes it's noted by having the CC there at the bottom of the screen. You can adjust the playback speed to slow down the video. So if you feel like I'm going too fast, you can always slow it down, and I'm going to sound a lot slower. Okay. Consider watching short clips, then pause, listen, and watch again. Okay. So as you're going through it, if for some reason that you see something that you want to go back and rewatch, just pause it, rewind it, and go back to it. I do that all the time. Ask someone in your home to watch the video with you. Stop frequently and talk to your partner about what you heard and understood. Okay? I do this a lot with my son. Okay? As we do things together, that way I can help him and assist him. So have someone in your house watch the video with you as well. You guys can discuss what's happening, and you can make sure that you really understood what's going on. Okay, so you saw me in week 1 and I'm back in week 4. Yay! I'm so excited. Okay, so this week we're actually going back to the text that we had from week 3, which was the article, A Teacher's Defense of Homework. Okay, so we're focusing with our essential question this week on why do we have controversy in our society? Before we dive into this week's assignments, I wanted to do a little bit of a review on some of the things. Okay. Talking about controversy. Controversy just means that it's a public debate or dispute concerning a matter of opinion. A controversial issue is debatable, or an issue about which there can be a disagreement. Okay. So basically, if you have something that is controversial, it means that you have people that have very strong opinions on both sides. Okay, and that it's debatable, meaning that you can argue in favor of it or against it. Okay, so let's take a look at what a debatable claim really looks like, because sometimes we have something that we think is debatable, but it's really not. So taking a look at this claim, smoking is harmful to people's health. Okay, what do we think about that? Is it a debatable claim or a not debatable claim? So if it's debatable, like I said, that you can have an opposing argument, you can argue against it. Okay? But when I think about smoking and being harmful to people's health, most people would agree that it is harmful, but sometimes they just choose to do it anyways. It's not debatable, okay? Because you can't argue that it doesn't have a harmful effect on people's health. That is not arguable because that's mostly known by people, and there is evidence to prove that. Plants produce oxygen that the world needs to sustain life. Debatable or non-debatable? Okay. Well, is it true? Do plants produce oxygen that the world needs to sustain life? Yes, I don't know a lot about science, but I do know that that's true. So it's not something that we can argue. It's non-debatable. Australia has some of the most venomous snakes in the world. Yeah, can we argue against it if there's facts to back it up? Okay. If you look at it, which I did not know this, but I did look it up, Australia really does have some of the most venomous snakes in the world. We can't argue against that. It's a fact that actually has that. So it's non-debatable. Monday, you were supposed to answer some questions. Now, before we answer those questions, I wanted to review with you one more thing. This is a strategy that I use with my students. Okay? We call it R.A.C.E.S. Now, you may have seen the strategy R.A.C.E.S before, or sometimes it's just ACE, A-C-E. If you look at R.A.C.E.S, okay, we start with that R. R means to restate the question. This is the easiest part of answering anything. When you restate the question, it shows the person that you know what you're talking about and what you're answering. I like to tell my students that I should be able to read the first sentence of their answer and know exactly what the question was based off of how they started their answer. Okay. So it gives us a sample here. If your question said, how are the themes similar in these passages? You would simply restate the themes of these passages share similarities, and then you're going to be able to go into your answer from there. The next part, the A, answer the question, I usually combine this with my R, and that's what I encourage my students to do, to make it one question or one sentence, because it actually does flow together. You're restating it and you're answering it together. Using the titles of passages will often help you here as well. Okay? For example, The Whipping Boy and Sand, Shells, and Sunshine share the theme, friends help you overcome. You've answered it, okay? And if you combine that with R, okay, that's going to help give you a more solid answer, and it's one sentence. You can just combine it into one. For the C, citing evidence. Okay, our evidence comes from our text, okay? And this is typically a quote. It can be a paraphrase as well. I do like to encourage my students to use a direct quote in the 6th grade, because I feel like we're still learning how to quote and then explain our evidence. So I do encourage them to use that, as long as you put quotation marks around it to make sure that you're citing your evidence correctly. I like to include a sentence stem at the beginning to introduce that evidence. Okay, here are a few samples right here. According to the text is a very popular one to use. You can also use the text explains, the author wrote, and give the title of the article, it says, or give the title of the novel, the text, whichever one you're using. Okay. So these are very helpful, and these will be on this slide. So if you want to go back to this part later on when you're working on answers, if you want to go back to your answers, you can always return to this. The E stands for explain the importance. This is so important whenever we're using evidence. It's not enough to just find a sentence or piece of evidence from the text that explains or that supports what you're talking about. You have to explain it as well. Okay? You have to be able to show how that evidence supports your answer up here. Okay? And that's what that E does. This connects all of these together. Okay? We want to show how, like I said, makes those connections to our answer. Okay? This is very important, that E. Then the S. The S is pretty much, other than the R and the A, it's the next easiest part, because you're just summing up what you said. Okay? You're just going back and you're summarizing what your main point of your paragraph was. Here are some helpful transitional words and phrases to get you started. All in all, I really like that one. To sum it up, as you can see, typical ones like to summarize or in conclusion, but I feel like we can always step it up a little bit. I said, all in all, that's a really good one. I like using that one a lot. Okay. So again, if you break it down, you can have more C's and E's in a paragraph than just one. Okay? But lots of times you can just use the one. You can have R.A.C.E.S. Sometimes you might have R.A.C.E., C.E.S. It just depends. But like I said, it's not a requirement that you use this. It's just a great strategy to make sure that you're including all the elements necessary whenever you are answering a question or prompt. Okay. All right, so now that we've reviewed that, let's actually get into some answers from what you were supposed to work on this week. Okay. So Monday gave us a couple of questions, right? We were supposed to return back to that text. So if for some reason you had already gotten rid of it, you could always print it again because it's still available on the KCS website. Okay. But returning to the text, responding to the following questions. Use text evidence to support your responses. Who is the intended audience of the article? And why did the author write the article? Right, that's our first question. And question 2, in paragraph 3, the author says she uses homework to supplement the notes she gives in class. What does supplement mean in this opinion piece? Use context clues and a dictionary to help you decide. Then tell why the author thinks it is necessary to supplement her notes with homework. So let's look at an answer for question 1. Before we get into it, there are some sentence frames here that could be helpful if for some reason you were struggling with that answer and kind of how to get started with it. Okay? Sentence frames are a great way to just kind of break that brain block and get us started. Okay? So look through these and see if there are any that, like I said, if you were struggling and you look at this and maybe think, oh, that's great. That's exactly what I wanted to say, or that's going to help me get started. Feel free to use these. Okay? Sentence frames, like I said, they're a great way to just bust through that brain block. Here's my sample answer for number 1, using that R.A.C.E.S strategy. And because I'm sort of an ELA nerd, I color coded it. So I know my honors students always appreciate a good color coding. So this is for you guys. Right. So I've got my R and my A, okay, and I did do two different colors for that. Okay. The intended audience of the article is, so I've restated my answer, or restated my question, sorry. Parents, specifically parents who have read and agree with the ideas presented in the essay, My Daughter's Homework is Killing Me, by Carl Terrell Greenfield. So I've restated my question or my prompt, and I've answered it in one sentence. Next would be my C, so that's my text evidence. I did not include a quote for this, I just included evidence that was from the text. So I said, the text explains that Andrea Townsend is both a parent and a teacher who explains her belief that homework is necessary for students to be successful. Okay. Moving on from that, I want to make a bit of an explanation, right, for my E. This is important because it allows Townsend to connect with her audience on the level of a parent who shares similar struggles and as a teacher who finds the homework necessary. Okay. So this kind of makes sure that we're showing that she is connecting with her audience, okay, by saying that not only is she a teacher, but she is a parent too. And knowing that when you're reading the article could make a difference as a parent because you see her in both lenses. You're able to see that she not only is just a teacher trying to promote homework, but she's a parent and she understands where the parents are coming from. All in all, Townsend's intended audience is parents who she wishes to convince that homework is necessary for students. So I just summarized what my point was. That was my S. So I hope this was helpful for you just to kind of take an example of how you could use races in some of your answers. Again, not necessary at all. Just wanted to give you an example of something that might be helpful if you struggle sometimes to make sure that you're fully answering a question. Going back to question number 2. Okay. Here are some sentence frames that could possibly have helped you get started with this because we're focusing in number 2 on the word supplement, okay, and what that word means in this specific piece, okay, and why the author thinks it's necessary to supplement her notes with homework. So here's a great sentence frame to really help you get started with that. The author uses homework to supplement the notes she gives in class. In this opinion piece, the word supplement means, and then give your definition of that word. One can determine the meaning using context clues such as, okay, and that brings in your evidence. The dictionary defines the word supplement as, okay, and so that way you're able to pull in what that meaning is. The author thinks it is necessary to supplement her notes with homework because, and again, going back to evidence from that text. You'll notice whenever we're doing these answers, we always want to make sure that you're pulling in evidence from the text. It basically just makes sure that you know what you're talking about. And whenever you can back up what you think with evidence, it makes you sound a whole lot smarter. So here's a sample answer for number 2. Again, it doesn't have to look exactly like this. This is just overall kind of what we're hoping you got to. Okay? So within this context, supplement means add to something that seems not to be enough of its own. The author thinks it is necessary to supplement her notes with homework because if she did not, she wouldn't be able to spend as much class time on labs and other hands-on activities. So when you see that quote at the bottom, that was pulled in from our text. Okay? And then up here, the word supplement, that's pulling in that definition of the word. You could definitely use the R.A.C.E.S strategy for this as well, or you could have just simply gone back and kind of filled in those sentence frames like I showed you here, but just making sure that you have all of those components in your answer. Okay. Moving on to Tuesday. Okay. So for Tuesday, we had 2 other questions to answer. Okay. Question number 3, how does the author strengthen her argument in paragraphs 5 and 6? And then question 4 asked, why does the author say there is room for compromise in paragraph 7? So for this, we're going to back out of here for a second, and I'm going to take you back to our actual text. Okay? So this was our article from week 3. So I'm going to go back, and question number 3 wanted me to look at paragraphs 5 and 6 for evidence, okay, of how she strengthens her argument in paragraph 5 and 6. So I'm going to go back and take a look. I've already highlighted some things that I want to make note of when I'm talking to you today. So one argument, paragraph 5, One argument which Greenfield uses is to compare American students with those in other countries. In his article, Greenfield cites the fact that students in many overseas countries are scoring higher than American children while being assigned less homework. Okay? So, one reason why our author wanted to bring in another viewpoint, okay, is to help prove why she believes hers is right. It sounds kind of confusing to think, why do you want to bring up someone else's point of view when you're trying to prove yours? Okay? But when we're trying to focus on our claim and having other people agree with our claim, a really good thing to do is to show what we sometimes call a counterclaim or a counter argument, and it's the other side. And if you can take the other side's argument and prove why they are wrong, then you really show that you're right. Okay? At least that's what I do. So she's bringing up the point here that some other countries, okay, that have students who are being successful are being assigned less homework than what we do. Okay? So she wanted to bring that point up. However, she also mentions here that Japanese teachers are not assigning much homework, but the Japanese kids are doing plenty of homework anyway. And then she goes on into paragraph 6 to explain it a little bit more. So Japanese kids do academic work outside of school. It's just not necessarily work assigned by their classroom teacher. Okay, so she wanted to bring this up to strengthen her argument that while the teachers themselves are not assigning the work, the students are choosing to do it on their own. So they're still getting that same reinforcement. It's just not technically being assigned by the teacher. Okay, so that takes me into my answer for 3. Okay. Townsend cites an opposing viewpoint that American students are assigned more homework than Japanese students, but achieve lower scores on tests, and responds to that argument by offering evidence against it. Okay. So that's when she brought up the point that even though they're not being assigned more homework, they're still doing the work. And so that's what's helping them to have higher achieving test scores. Okay. So question 4 asked me to go back to paragraph 7. So before I go over that answer, let's look at paragraph 7. Okay. So again, it wanted to ask why does the author say there is room for compromise in paragraph 7? So I'm going to go back to my text. It says in the very first line of paragraph 7, there is room for compromise on the homework debate. In their book, Reforming Homework, Richard Walker and Mike Horsley state that while homework isn't very beneficial for younger kids, it's still beneficial for older students. Okay? And later on mentions, the vast majority of teachers I know are careful to only assign work that's important for student success. Okay? So looking at those points is going to help me answer why our author says that there is room for compromise. Okay, so compromise basically just means where you're kind of meeting in the middle. Okay, you want one thing, they want another thing. You come to compromise where you agree on something that's kind of in between typically. This person usually gives a little and that person usually gives a little. It's compromise. It's like marriage. Okay. All right, so here's a sample answer for number 4. Again, you can definitely use that R.A.C.E.S strategy here if you wanted to. This is just a sample to make sure that you're kind of hitting the high points. The author allows that there is room for compromise because she knows there are some instances in which students are assigned too much homework. This concession is meant to persuade opponents of her point of view to consider some of her earlier points by admitting that their argument has some merit as well. So just like we were talking about before, she was really just trying to show the other side and how she can kind of agree with them, because that's going to make people want to listen to her more and show that she respects the other side. And it's just kind of proving that her side is got merit as well. Okay, merit meaning that her argument has a point as well. It has a valid point, a valid argument. Okay. So that takes us to Wednesday. Okay. For Wednesday, okay, here are our questions that we were looking at answering. Number 5, at what age does the author say homework becomes more important? And how does she provide evidence to support her claim? So with this, we just would have to go back to the text and really look and find where the author starts talking about at what point homework is more important. Okay. Another useful thing to do right here would be to use those sentence frames, okay? Just like we've been talking about in some of the other answers. The author states that homework becomes more important when, give your answer. The author claims, provide your evidence to support her argument. Again, use those sentence frames if you need to, because it really just helps to make sure that you're providing a really well-rounded response and that your response is fully answering the question. So sample answer for number 5 would be something like this. In general, the author says that homework is more important for older children than younger children. Okay. She supports this claim by referencing Walker and Horsley and providing anecdotal evidence. So that was that one paragraph when I went back to it in paragraph 7 that we had just looked at. That is where that evidence was found in, if you wanted to go back and look at that. And number 6, this was our multiple choice question. Okay. So which of these statements from the article is the best example of a claim? Now, before we just talk about the answer, I do want to make a point here. I always tell my students to pay close attention to words that are in bold or underlined in a question. That word is standing out to you for a reason. So the word best, it's in bold. Whoever wrote the question wants me to pay attention to it more so than some of the others. Right? Lots of times those words are in bold or underlined because sometimes a question might be difficult to understand. So when I see the word best, okay, that makes me think that I might have more than one correct answer in this question, but I want to make sure I find the best. Okay? So that just always stands out to me, and I wanted to make sure to point it out to you all. Sometimes there can be more than one correct answer. You want to make sure that you're finding the best. Right. So the best example of a claim: I struggle daily with making sure my daughter does her homework. American kids need homework. I teach each topic in depth so that students understand and appreciate the information. Well, obviously, I feel like our best example of a claim would be B, okay, from our article. That would be the author's overall claim that American kids need homework, much to their chagrin. I know my kids don't like homework that much, and I'm sure a lot of you don't either. So now, going into Thursday, we're actually going to be revisiting that answer for our answers here. So these questions asked for you to explain the claim that you selected in question 6, okay, and explain why you agree or disagree with that claim. Then share your position on the subject of homework. So I'm going to show you a way to kind of combine all of that together. I did not include a sample answer for this because this is really you sharing your point. Here's a great way that you could use to plan your writing since you're having to have a lot of components together. So I have my claim, okay, from the article, American kids need homework. So this leaves a place for you to explain that claim. Okay? So you're just explaining the claim from the article. Then moving on here, why do you agree or disagree with that claim? I'm sure there are plenty of you that disagree, but some of you might agree with it, especially as you're starting to get older. You're in middle school now. You're going to be in high school in a couple of years. So you kind of fall into that group that she says really needs more of it to help with your achievement. So maybe you do agree now. Okay? And then your position on it. Okay? So this would be sharing like what your position on the subject of homework is. Does that make sense? I hope. All right. So looking at that, that's just a great way to help you answer them. But for questions 7 and 8, I said, that's really on you. That's whatever you thought and how you felt you could best explain, like I said, how you agree or disagree with it, and then what your position overall is. And now moving on to Friday. For Friday, okay, we're taking a look again at that whole debatable claims topic. Okay, it says to read the section below and write your own debatable claim about homework. So revisiting again, what makes claims debatable? Okay, a claim must be something that people could reasonably have differing opinions on. If your claim is something that is generally agreed upon or accepted as fact, then there is no reason to try to convince people. Right? So that's what we were we reviewed at the beginning of this lesson were some of those claims that were not debatable, okay, because they're accepted as fact. And there's no reason to try to convince people that smoking is harmful to your health because that's accepted as fact. We know that. Okay? Here's an example of a non-debatable claim. Air pollution is bad for the environment. Well, this claim is not debatable, right? First, the word pollution means that something is bad, or negative in some way. Further, all studies agree that air pollution has a negative impact. They simply disagree on the specific impact it will have or the scope of the problem. No one could reasonably argue that air pollution is good. So since you can't argue against that, it's a non-debatable claim. Okay? An example of a more debatable claim around the same topic would be at least 25% of the federal budget should be spent on limiting air pollution. Okay, this is different. This claim is debatable because reasonable people could disagree with it. Some people might think that this is how we should spend the nation's money. Others might believe that this amount is too much to spend to limit air pollution. Still, others could argue that corporations, not the government, should be paying to limit air pollution. All of those factors make this a debatable claim, right? Versus our first one, which was not debatable. Right? So for you, you are going to write your own debatable claim about homework. Okay? So when you're kind of doing that, here at the bottom here, we have just some sentence frames to brainstorm some ideas, okay, for a topic. So if you were kind of having a hard time, these are just some sentence frames to help you get your brain going, get that blood flowing and pumping, okay, on ways that you could possibly have a claim. Here we go. And here are some sample claims that I came up with. Of course, these don't have to be yours at all. I just wanted to kind of give you some to go off of if you felt like you were struggling with this part. Okay. Homework is a necessity of learning and improves student achievement for all ages. Okay. So I included that all ages part because I really feel like that is the part that's debatable, right? Because we can say that some research shows that it is more of a necessity for older students versus younger students. So that's what makes it a more debatable claim. Okay. Homework allows parents to be involved in their child's learning in a positive way. Okay. Well, I've been doing stuff at home with my son right now, who is a 4th grader, and I got to tell you, it's not always positive. Okay. So that's what makes it debatable. Some might agree with that and some might not. So again, makes it a more debatable claim. And then homework should only be allowed in high school. Okay. Well, as a middle school teacher, I could probably debate that, definitely. Okay. So again, these are just some samples. I hope you came up with your own, okay, and something that you really felt passionate about. I think overall, the article from last week that we were using again this week, it was a great one for kids because homework is something that a lot of us feel very passionately about in one way or another. Okay. My feelings as a teacher, probably very different than your feelings as a student. All right. Well, this about rounds out our lesson for today. I hope that you all really were able to enjoy that article. Like I said, it's definitely one that is got some interest for kids of your age. I know that homework isn't always seen as something positive, but hopefully you were able to see a different viewpoint as well. And I also hope that we were able to learn a little bit about debatable claims and what makes something debatable, as well as the fact that when you're trying to prove an argument, it also helps to bring in the other side and talk about them some, because that strengthens our argument when we can show the other side and why they're wrong and we're right, if that's a way to put it. So anyway, keep that in mind. Right. There will be lessons available for you next week as well. That'll be in the same format as far as when you pick it up, and for you to download off of the KCS website if you need to. Right. So again, thank you for joining me this week. I really appreciate you watching this video and engaging in some learning at home. I know that it's been a struggle for us to adjust, but I hope you all are doing really well with it. This has been a treat for me because it allows me to interact with some students, even students I don't know, and it allows me to do what I love, which is teaching in English, because English is awesome. Yeah.